Most people spend 40 years working toward a retirement they are too tired to enjoy. Dayo watched his father retire at 67 after 4 decades in the same company, and within 18 months, his father had lost the sense of purpose that had structured every single day of his adult life and the health that would have let him do the things he had always said he was waiting for. Dayo was 31 when he watched that happen, and he made a quiet decision that most people around him thought was naive and unrealistic and probably a little arrogant. He decided he was not going to wait until 67. Not because he had inherited money or discovered a clever investment scheme or stumbled into a high-paying career, but because he understood something that traditional retirement planning almost never addresses and that most financial advice never mentions at all. Retirement is not a number in a bank account, and it is not an age on a calendar, and it is not the moment you stop working. Retirement is a relationship with time, and most people never build that relationship while they are busy building the number. Today we are going to look at why the minimalist approach to early retirement is not just about spending less and investing more, and why the people who retire earliest are almost never the ones who did the most complex financial planning. Stay with me, because what we are going to look at changes not just how you think about money, but how you think about the entire structure of your working life. Let us start with the retirement planning lie that almost nobody in the financial space will say out loud. The standard model of retirement planning is built entirely on one assumption, and that assumption is that the goal is to accumulate enough money to replace your current income for the rest of your life. This sounds reasonable on the surface, but it contains a fatal flaw, and the flaw is this. It assumes that the life you are living right now while you are working and spending and keeping up with your social environment is the life you actually want, and therefore the life worth funding in retirement. For most people, it is not. The income most people need to maintain their current lifestyle is significantly larger than the income they would need to fund a deliberately designed life built around what actually matters to them. Dayo did a specific exercise at 31 that changed how he saw his entire financial situation, and it was not a budgeting exercise, and it was not a retirement calculator. He spent one weekend writing down everything he spent money on in a typical month, and beside each item he wrote one of two things. Either, "This is part of the life I would design if I could design anything," or, "This is part of the life I have drifted into." The results were confronting. Roughly 60% of Dayo's monthly spending fell into the second category. Drifted into rather than deliberately chosen, and almost all of it was connected to the cost of maintaining a professional identity and a social standard that he had never consciously signed up for. The apartment in the right neighborhood because it matched his professional level, not because he genuinely loved it there. The car that communicated something about his career rather than serving the actual function of moving him from one place to another. The wardrobe built around what was appropriate for someone at his level rather than what he would wear if nobody was watching. When Dayo removed all of the spending that was funding an identity he had drifted into rather than chosen, he discovered that the life he actually wanted, the one he would design from scratch, cost about 40% less per month than the life he was currently living. And that 40% gap changed everything about his retirement timeline. Now let us talk about what early retirement actually requires, because most people who think about it approach it as a maths problem and then get discouraged when the maths looks impossible. The standard calculation goes like this. Take your current annual expenses, multiply by 25, and that is the amount you need invested before you can retire. If you spend $60,000 a year, you need $1.5 million. If you spend $80,000 a year, you need $2 million. Most people look at those numbers and conclude that early retirement is for people who earn a lot or get lucky or inherit something. But here is what the standard calculation misses entirely. The number you multiply by 25 is not fixed. It is a reflection of the life you choose to live. Dayo's 60% drift spending meant that his genuine annual cost of living, the cost of the life he would actually choose, was not $60,000 per year. It was $36,000. $36,000 multiplied by 25 is $900,000. Not $2 million. Not $1.5 million. 900,000. The minimalist insight about early retirement is not that you should deprive yourself of things you love in order to reach a number faster. It is that the number itself shrinks dramatically when you remove the spending that was never funding your actual life in the first place. And a smaller number reached consistently is almost always closer than a larger number reached efficiently. Dayo did not have to earn more or invest more cleverly or take more financial risk to move his retirement timeline from 67 to his early 40s. He had to look honestly at what his current spending was actually buying him. But here is where the minimalist approach to early retirement goes beyond money and into territory that most financial channels never touch. The hardest part of early retirement is not the accumulation. It is the identity. In most modern economies, your career is not just your source of income. It is your social introduction, your daily structure, your sense of contribution, your answer to the question that every new person you meet asks within the first 3 minutes of conversation. What do you do? When you retire early, you do not just leave a salary behind. You leave behind the entire scaffolding that most adults use to understand who they are and where they fit. Dayo watched this happen to a colleague who retired at 44 after a successful corporate career. The money was there. The plan was there. What was not there was any understanding of who he was when he was not defined by his job title and his professional achievements and the daily rhythm of being needed and recognized and useful in a structured way. Within a year, he was bored and anxious and quietly miserable in a way that confused him because he had everything he had worked for. The minimalist principle here is not about money at all. It is about building your identity before you exit the career that has been providing it. The people who retire early and thrive are almost never the ones who worked hard to reach the number and then stopped. They are the ones who built a parallel life, interests and relationships and creative work and community and purpose that was already running before the career ended. So that when the career ended, they were not stepping into a void. They were stepping into a life that was already full. Let us talk about what Dayo called the decompression problem, because it is the thing that catches most early retirees off guard even when they have done everything right financially. The human nervous system is remarkably good at adapting to high-pressure environments. After years of deadlines and performance reviews and the constant low-level urgency of a demanding career, your baseline for what feels normal is calibrated to that level of activation. When the pressure is suddenly removed, most people do not feel liberated immediately. They feel restless. They feel like they should be doing something. They check their emails out of habit even when there are no emails that matter. They feel vaguely guilty on Tuesday afternoons when the sun is out and they are not working. The minimalist approach to this transition is about deliberately recalibrating what rest means before the retirement begins. Dayo spent 2 years before his planned exit date practicing what he called intentional unscheduled time, deliberately building periods into his week that had no productivity goal and no measurable output and no professional value. Not holidays and not weekends spent recovering for the next week. Real open time with no agenda. He found it genuinely uncomfortable at first. The discomfort told him something important, that his relationship with time had been completely colonized by productivity, and that reclaiming it was going to require as much deliberate effort as the financial planning had. By the time he actually retired, the unscheduled time felt natural rather than anxious. The decompression had already happened. And the transition was calm rather than disorienting because he had practiced being the person he was going to become before he became that person. Now let us look at a specific and underappreciated concept that sits at the center of every successful early retirement, and it is the concept of work optional rather than work finished. The traditional retirement model draws a hard line, before the line you work and after the line you do not. This binary is one of the reasons early retirement feels psychologically dangerous to most people. Stopping forever is a very high-stakes decision. It triggers every anxiety about identity and purpose and relevance and usefulness that most people carry somewhere underneath the surface of their working life. The minimalist reframe is softer and more honest and ultimately more achievable for most people. Instead of aiming for retirement defined as never working again, Dayo aimed for what he called the work optional threshold, the point at which work became a choice rather than a requirement. At the work optional threshold, Dayo could afford to say no to work he did not want to do. He could say yes to work he found meaningful even if it paid less. He could take 6 months off and then do something interesting for a year and then take another 6 months off. The financial independence was not the end of contribution. It was the beginning of contribution on his own terms. This reframe matters enormously for 2 reasons. First, it makes the psychological transition far less threatening because you are not giving up work, you are gaining the ability to choose it. And second, it often changes the actual number required because if you are open to doing some meaningful paid work, after reaching the threshold, the portfolio does not have to carry the entire weight of your financial life indefinitely. Dayo reached his work optional threshold at 42. He has since done consulting work that interests him for roughly 4 months a year. He turns down the work that does not interest him. He is not retired in the traditional sense. He is something better. He is free. Let us now talk about the 3 specific minimalist principles that accelerated Dayo's timeline in ways that pure financial optimization never could have. The first principle is what Dayo called the subtraction audit. Once a year, not monthly and not weekly, Dayo would go through every financial commitment in his life and ask one question for each one. What would my life actually look like without this? Not whether he could afford it. Not whether it was reasonable for someone at his income level. What would his life actually look like without it? Some things passed the test immediately. The answer was clearly worse without them. Other things revealed something interesting when he sat with the question honestly. The answer was either the same or better. The gym membership he kept because canceling felt like giving up, but when he asked honestly, he realized he had been doing the same outdoor running for 2 years and had not entered the gym in 9 months. The streaming service he kept because everyone had it, but when he asked honestly, he watched one show every few weeks and did not miss it on the months he forgot to use it. The annual subtraction audit was not a cost-cutting exercise. It was a clarity exercise. And clarity about what actually contributes to the quality of your life is the foundational skill of minimalist retirement planning. The second principle is environmental design over willpower. Dayo observed early in his retirement planning journey that the people who successfully maintained high savings rates and low lifestyle inflation over long periods were almost never doing it through discipline and self-denial. They were doing it through environmental design, by structuring their physical and social environment in ways that made the desired behaviors the path of least resistance. He moved to a neighborhood where walking and cycling were the natural way to move rather than driving. He built his social life around people who measured status through experiences and mastery and contribution rather than through possessions and consumption. He organized his home so that the things he used most and valued most were immediately accessible and visible, and everything else was either absent or stored inconveniently. None of these changes required willpower once they were in place because the environment itself was doing the work. The third principle is time accounting alongside money accounting. Dayo tracked not just where his money went but where his time went. He did a time audit every 6 months in the same way he did a financial audit, mapping every hour of every day for 2 weeks and categorizing each hour honestly. Time spent in activities that gave him energy and meaning. Time spent in activities that were neutral, necessary but not particularly meaningful. Time spent in activities that drained him. The goal was to move the ratio consistently over time toward the first category. And here is where the time audit and the financial audit connected in a way that surprised him. Almost every activity in the drain category was also expensive. The social obligations he attended out of professional necessity. The consumption patterns driven by stress recovery rather than genuine enjoyment. The commute that consumed 2 hours of his best mental energy every day. Reducing the time spent in the drain category did not just improve the quality of his days. It reduced his spending. Because most of his expensive spending was compensating for the drain. So here is the full picture of what early retirement with a minimalist mindset actually requires. It requires an honest accounting of what you are actually spending your money on versus what you would choose to spend it on if you designed your life from scratch. It requires building the identity and the relationships and the purpose that will carry you through the transition before the transition happens. It requires reframing the goal from retirement as the end of work to work optional as the beginning of choice. It requires practicing the relationship with time that early retirement will demand before you actually have all the time. And it requires the 3 minimalist principles, the subtraction audit and environmental design and time accounting, applied consistently over years rather than perfectly over months. Dayo reached his work optional threshold at 42. Not because he earned more than most people. Not because he discovered a superior investment strategy. But because he asked the question that most retirement planning never asks, what does the life I actually want cost and how is that different from the life I am currently living? The gap between those two answers is your real retirement timeline. And for most people who ask the question honestly, the gap is much shorter than they assumed. Share this video with one person in your life who has said they want to retire early but believes it is not possible for someone at their income level. Because the maths of early retirement changes completely when you start with the right question. I will see you in the next one.